Hi, everybody. I'm Carol Berg, and I'm going to be reading from my new Chimera adventure, A Summoning of Demons, that will be coming out in February from Tor Books. Not long after an earthquake breaks the summer doldrums in Catania, the Shadow Lord tasks the Chimera with a new mission that takes them to a ruined fortress outside the city. Pressured by time and the complexities of the mission and some personal difficulties that she has not yet shared with her partners, Romy slips into the city at night, relishing the chance to sleep in her own bed for a night, only to discover a surprise. Though the moon was still light enough to show the way, I could have found my way home, no matter how dark. I knew every rut, every stone, every stink of Lizard's Alley. Were I stone blind, my hand could locate the door latch in one try. Yet on this night, a surprise did await me, and if not for the moon, I would have missed it. Under the aged bench, just outside our door, I found a small stone crock, sealed with wax. Curious, I carried it inside and left it on the table as I grabbed the tinder box and made a fire in our brazier. Once a lamp was lit and the pot filled and set on to boil, I took another look. No markings on the crock or scribed in the wax seal. No message attached. Lamp in hand, I examined the bench in the alley and the space below it. In the end, I pried up the wax, assuming that the contents had to be the message. And so they were. A distinctive aroma arose from the jar where small silvery fish were packed tightly in oil and herbs. No matter every other happening of the previous days, the sight and smell had me laughing. Only one friend that I have who had ever worked down at Catania's docks helping to pack pilchards. Teo. It was a measure of my exhaustion that I fell on my bed rather than racing to the docks to rouse Teo and present all the questions I had ready for him. A few hours' sleep might ensure that I could comprehend his answers. Eventually, my eyes blinked open to sunlight and fish and lemon and a clean smelling bulk close by, breathing. I sat up and found Teo sitting cross legged on the floor beside my pallet. Friend Romy, he said, his head tilted slightly, as always when he smiled, a smile that could light a winter solstice midnight. Gladsome it is to see thee again, Kyria. I scrambled to sitting, happy I'd not bothered to strip off my garments when collapsing on my pallet. And you, fair traveler from the Isles of Lesh, I said, your greeting, packed, I assume, with your grandmother's favored herbs, gladdened my heart as well. Had it not been very late and me dead on my feet, I would have met you at the docks as soon as I found it. Wise as ever. When I saw the jar was moved this morning, I assumed your invitation to return here yet held, and I very much need to speak with you. Always, I said, but I'll be much more sensible if I make tea before we talk. I'd never presume to hinder your waking. I laughed and shoved a mug into his hand. You may help yourself to Nary's cask if you want. Nary cared little for tea or wine, preferring Placidio's salt, ginger, and lemon brew. Fortunately, Nary kept a small cask of the horrid stuff in the house. Not this morning. Barefoot, his lean frame clad in loose tunic, slops, and leggings that covered the inked symbols that marked his skin from throat to ankles and wrists, Teo was assuredly the same man I'd seen dive naked into the river 3 months ago. And yet the daylight was revelatory. In moonlight, I would have noticed that his pale hair had been cropped short, and how a patch covered one of his iridescent eyes, and that his once torn earlobes now bore dangling slips of engraved brass. But I might have missed the more subtle changes. In the days after I dragged Teo from the river Vina at the brink of death, he had been charming and generous, filled with a childlike whimsy. His emotions had shown through his skin, making it impossible to disbelieve him. He had expressed humble gratitude for my help and astonishment that I call the marvels of his talents magic. Laying open his heart, he confessed how he was struggling to reclaim the part of his life that lay beyond what he called the glaring lens of the world. He had a duty, he had said, to find something he could sense but could not name, and feared that his brokenness risked failure that could endanger his people. On this morning, my friend was neither lost nor uncertain. His courtesy was bound with threads of urgency. His back and shoulders were tense, the shifting colors of his eye more intense than I remembered. Nothing about him spoke of whimsy. Your brother is well, he said, as I filled the pot with water and set it on the reawakened fire of the brazier. And your noble friends of the Chimera? Indeed so. Everyone will be glad to hear you come back to Catania. Dumont's wife, Vashti, our quiet sage, has felt cheated that she had no chance to meet our other friend from distant shores. Someday. His smile was fleeting. At my invitation, he moved to one of the stools beside my table. I offered him a biscuit and some grapes left from our last market foray. He declined. Not eating or drinking this morning, I said. Is it your eye? I hope the problem is only a passing thing. It is not so much a problem as an inconvenience, he said, slipping the patch from his face. The covering is protection until new ink is properly set. What do you think? A new mark encircled his left eye, a delicate lacework of small spirals in silver that glinted in the light. Impossible to make out more details of the design without moving too close to be polite. Beautiful and mysterious, it suits you. And it demanded attention. The patch would remain beyond the setting of the ink, I guessed, as long as he was among strangers. I could not help but contrast it with the horrid red mouths that marked the sniffer on the academy footbridge. A new mark means you've learned something new, I said. He had told me that the ink symbols were reminders of joys or sorrows, of stories, people, beliefs, or lessons learned. It just happened that the particular symbols his people used on their skin were only seen elsewise on fading mosaic and painted urns from centuries past. Indeed, I've remembered many things, he said, though not all. I'm confident, however, I found Domenica. Your mother's servant. As far as he'd been able to tell us, Teo had been sent by his family to meet this woman in Quarona. But on his journey from the distant isles of his home, he had been waylaid by thieves who had beaten him to the brink of death and thrown him in the river. I had blamed the beating for Teo's faulty memory, though Placidio, ever the frustrating well of privacies, believed there was more significance to the gaps in Teo than a bruised head. Aye, she took charge of me and my education, which was my family's intent all along. We will continue with that until I return home to Lesh. She also took custody of your captive assassin. He lives, and in time will be given opportunities to learn and improve himself. As I promised, he will harm no one else. But had Teo recalled what he'd been sent here to find? Placidio and I had concluded that the object of his search was a mysterious antiquity, a small bronze statue of the god at Ladu, the monster Dragonus, and a third, mostly missing figure that I had come to believe was Leviathan, the mythical sea creature who had enabled the gods to imprison Dragonus. The statue had not depicted the three as combatants, as was usual, but rather as companions in a hunt or a foot race. We had chosen not to tell Teo of our conclusion until his faulty memory was improved. Thus the statue remained safely in the possession of the devout and scholarly Grand Duke of Riccia by the Sea, safely in his possession. Unless, have you come back to Catania to take up your search? No, though yet sitting he stretched taller. He had been waiting for my question. Romy, you are in terrible danger. I scooped crushed leaves and herbs into my cup, added the steaming water, and set it on the table to steep. Then I sat across from Teo. I've lived with danger all my life. He leaned forward, his somber demeanor demanding that I heed. This is not the danger you know, from your own kind, but something far worse. You must come with me to Dominica today. Today? Certainly not. The air shifted as if a crack had opened between the seasons, mingling shards of winter with the warm smokes of autumn. But I could pay no heed. Two young people sat at perdition's brink, their futures and our cities in the balance, and our knowledge as yet incomplete. And even afterward, my life is in Catania, Teo. My family, my friends, our work is here. Were you dreaming, friend Romy, just now before you woke? All warmth vanished from the sunlight. No, Denial died on my tongue. Attention to the matter raised the memory, as if I'd opened a drapery obscuring the window. The man with golden skin and sun-blazed eyes had led me from the ruins into a vineyard, stealing grapes to pop in my mouth as he whispered secrets in my ear. Each fruit, plump and ripe, had burst with tart sweetness that lingered on my tongue even now. You and I, my lovely, shall reclaim my birthright, he'd said. Or had it been the woman again? Her voice like a river of honey, her lips brushing mine to taste the juice of the grape. Feel my hand. Teo's words yanked me back. His slender hand held steady in the center of the table, and as if drawn by invisible strings, my fingers touched his. Cold, I murmured, shuddering. You're cold as the night I pulled you from the river. He shook his head. But I'm not. Not this time. Let me show you. He held my finger and plunged it into my steaming tea. It felt no more than tepid. Teo's gaze did not leave my face, though a part of my seeing yet beheld that other face, smiling indulgently and setting my blood and flesh on fire. In truth, I jerked my hand from Teo's grasp and clutched my unscalded finger to my chest. Squeezing my eyes shut, I willed the dream away and reopened them to his somber visage. Spirits of the night eternal, Teo, how did you know I was dreaming? When I arrived here this morning, you were trembling in your sleep, flushed as you are now, as anyone would be when encountering the enemy. The enemy? I would not speak the name that came to mind, lest it shatter the structure of logic and reason. It was only a dream. I doubt that. Rueful he was, and firm and gentle. He gathered my hands and cupped them in his. Not so cold now. Or was it my own flesh had cooled down? The important question is, please tell me that this morning was the first time you dreamed like this. No, I murmured. Resentment and anger simmered in my gut. And certain I know it's no ordinary dream, but it isn't always the same, not even the same person in the dream every time. I see no monster. The enemy is many manifestations, bound into one being. This one learns what draws your interest. That one speaks words that have meaning to you. In dreams, they discover your weaknesses, your strengths, your pleasures, your guilts. But it is only the one being. I reclaimed my hands, planting my elbows on the table and my chin on their folded knot. How dare this man tell me I was a tool of his enemy? Though he had not actually said the word tool, the implication was clear. But the stories he referred to were myth. There was no enemy imprisoned beneath the earth or the sea. No gods had ever manifested themselves outside of tales, so how could other stories be true? No Gione returned to bless the harvest, bountiful or lean as it might be. No Atlato responded to prayers to make the Vigna reseed when it flooded half the beggar's ring, or opened his mighty hand to grant us rain in the years the vines withered. So how could there be a Dragoness or Leviathan? And there I stumbled. Only 3 months since I had installed Teo into the myth of Leviathan. He bore an abiding love for the sea and could swim impossible distances against the current of the Vigna. He believed his duty was to prevent monsters from hurting others. He refused to lie. He wore these ancient markings on his skin, and the language that came to him most naturally was Typhonese, which had not been spoken for uncounted centuries. In hours he had healed himself of injuries that would kill an ordinary man. Placidio claimed that Leviathan, the mythic sea creature who lay dormant waiting for the world's need, was sometimes portrayed as a human, naked like a Ladu, naked as I had seen Teo on the night he dove into the river with a vicious assassin, a captive human monster. And Placidio, a man of secrets who was not one to be swayed by lies or storytelling, had bowed to Teo and said his people and their secrets and customs were worthy of respect. All right, these dreams are not ordinary, I said. They're terrible and unusually vivid. Neri's crushed bones, the painted walls of a prison, the touch on my hair that tingled long after waking, the simmering resentments and anger that gnawed at me even now. Tell me, friend Romy. Teo's voice was soft, apologetic, as if my growing fear was his fault. Unyielding, though. By the bright universe, you must tell me everything. My gaze met his. In the fathomless iridescence of those eyes was his change most vivid. So much knowledge, so much worry. Curiosity and wonder had fled along with his confusion. In the span of 3 months, he had aged years. I lurched to my feet to ensure I kept them solidly on the floor. This is about the earthquake, isn't it? I said. Everything started after the earthquake. No, just before. That was the first time, though not a dream. On that day, it was only rage. Pacing, circling the confines of my house, I told him everything about the pain in my head on the day of the earthquake, about the continual worsening dreams of ruination and death, of the first where the woman appeared and told me I had a purpose, of the man who whispered hopes and longings that I understood but could not recall, for they were in a language that I didn't know outside the dream, of the vision in the wool house. Perhaps not a dream because I was searching for magic and had tried his own technique of turning inward. That was where the woman had been painting the landscapes on the walls of her prison. I told him of her lingering, seductive touch on my hair. My skin burns after the dreams, I said. And I think, no, I can't think. I'm always exhausted. Certain I know they aren't simple dreams. They leave my soul twisted in anger and, oh, blessed sisters, my body aroused. Even now I resent your waking me and forcing me to tell you these things. And yet I know I have to tell and want to tell. Spirits, Teo, what's happening to me? As I said, this is a reading from A Summoning of Demons, the third book of the Chimera, that will be released on February the 4th, 2021. Thanks. Have a great con.